Good morning, everyone. It is so good to have you here this morning at Digital Church with Stevens Road Baptist Church. And we want to say a happy Mother's Day to all those mothers out there. And in a few minutes, if your kids are watching with you, hey kids, if you are there, I'm going to show you how to make these handy dandy lilies that you can give to your mom or maybe a grandmother if they're close by. You can make a nice little bouquet. So before we do that, we just want to acknowledge Mother's Day, say Happy Mother's Day. But we also, every Mother's Day, we also want to say a big thank you to all the women out there who invest in people's lives and who are spiritual moms, who are mentors. And I have want to have a few words that I want to read to say thank you to all kinds of women out there. And the words here say more than what I can say right now. So we thank you to all the women out there today. Mothers are special people. You are. Without mothers, none of us would be here. Today we celebrate mothers and women who care for our children, keeping in mind that it is not an easy day for some. To those who gave birth this year to their first child, we celebrate with you. To those who lost a child this year, we mourn with you. To those who are in the trenches with little ones every day and wear the badge of food stains, we appreciate you. To those who experience loss through miscarriage, failed adoptions, or running away, we mourn with you. To those who walk the hard path of infertility, fraught with pokes, prods, tears, and disappointment, we walk with you too. Forgive us when we say foolish things. We don't mean to make this harder than it is. To those who have disappointment, heartache, and distance with your children, we sit with you. To those who lost their mothers, we grieve with you. To those who experienced abuse at the hands of their own mother, we acknowledge your experience. To those who lived through driving tests, medical tests, and the overall testing of motherhood, we are better for having you in our midst. To those who are single and long to be married and mothering your own children, we mourn that life has not turned out the way you longed for it to be. To those who step parent, we walk with you on these complex paths. To those who envisioned lavishing love on grandchildren, yet that dream is not to be, we grieve with you. To those who love on and take care of grandchildren, we appreciate you. To those who are foster moms, mentor moms, and spiritual moms, we really need you. To those who have warm and close relationships with your children, we celebrate with you. This Mother's Day, we walk with all of you. Mothering is not for the faint of heart, and we have real warriors in our midst. We remember you. We hope that you have a good Mother's Day. For many of us, it looks very different than what we would normally have. So if you're able to give a phone call, or if you're in the same room with your mom right now, make sure you give her a hug. Actually, kids, it is now time for explorers, and I'm going to show you how to make these lilies. And so you're going to need a couple of things. Now, when I do these crafts for you during Explorers on Sunday mornings, I try to think of things that you might have in your home. So I've actually used some stuff that I had in my home. And then when I came to the church record, I found a few other things that you might also have in your home. So you'll have to use your imagination and creativity in case you don't have the same things in your home as you do in my home, or as we would have in our craft cupboard in our church. Now, moms are usually pretty smart, and they are usually wise, and they have good advice and encouragement. And Pastor Christopher is going to talk about that a little bit more later in when he gives the sermon, when he preaches. And as you're crafting, you can listen along. Now you're going to need a few things. This is one of them that I made. So I'm going to set this down so I can show you some of my supplies, I think. So as you can see on this one, I used a straw for the stem. In my jar over here, I have one that I used 2 pipe cleaners, just wrapped one pipe cleaner around another just to give it a little more sturdiness. And this one that I have here, I just rolled up a piece of green construction paper. If you don't have construction paper at home, you can color a blank piece of paper and then roll it up. And I just use tape to tape it. So I have this here. You'll also take some paper or construction paper, and you're going to trace your hands on there. So you're going to want to trace your hands. If you have siblings, then maybe you can make a big bouquet of flowers for your mom and put all the lilies in a jar or a vase together for your mom. Or maybe your grandmother, if they're close by, you could drop it on their doorstep for them. So you're going to trace out some hands, different colors. If you only have white paper, then draw your hand and then color it in and then cut that out. You're also going to want to cut out little pieces of paper about 2 inches long. And once you get it cut out like a rectangle, you're going to cut thin strips down almost to the bottom. You'll leave about a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch at the bottom so that they look like this. You'll take this piece and wrap it around the top of your stem, and then you're going to tape that on. You probably, if you're using paper, you might be able to use staples, but I found tape worked the best. And then you're just going to take it and you're going to wrap the hand around there, and then you're going to take and tape that on, and you have most of your flower done. The very last thing you're going to do once you have it all taped together, and you're going to take the pencil that you used to trace your hand or the marker, and you're going to curl the fingers on the flower. So if this is twisted up like this on the stem, then you're going to put your thumb on one side of the paper and the pencil underneath, and then you're just going to pull, and look at that, it makes it curl. You put it on your thumb, your pencil, and then it curls like that. And that's what gives in my flowers the curl. And you can see the yellow in there for the middle of the lily. So I would love to see all of your flower creations that you make this morning. Maybe if you're going to make more than one flower, if you have other siblings and you make a bunch, you can take a picture and you can send that to me. Now, today is Mom's Day. So if you need help with your craft and Daddy's there with you guys, you can ask Daddy for help, because Mom should just get to sit there and relax. In fact, why don't right now, when you go to find your supplies, if you haven't already had them, you ask Mommy if she needs anything else. Maybe she needs a nice blanket as she watches church, or maybe a little bit more coffee. You ask her if she needs anything before she really settles in. And also, I'd love to hear what you love about your mom. So you can put a comment in the comments of the video on our Facebook page, or you can send me a message. One of your dad or your mom can send me a message. You can do that too. And anyone else who is watching with us, if you have something special that you'd like to share about your mom, or maybe it was someone in your life, a woman in your life who really encouraged you or was a mentor to you, share with us what you appreciate about that person. All right, we're going to continue on. So we hope that you enjoy making those lilies for your mom, and happy Mom's Day. We're going to share some announcements now. And we just our regular announcements about small group or Bible study this afternoon with Christopher at 2. Cereals has started up on Tuesday mornings around 9:45. We have youth group actually, we don't have any youth group tonight. We're taking a night off so that everyone can be with their moms, or someone who is a mom-like figure in their life can celebrate them. And we have kids night in tomorrow night on Monday evening from 6 to 7. And so those are our main announcements for this week. And we're just going to take a moment now to pray together. If you can keep Doug Peveril and Donna in your prayers. Doug is in the hospital for health concerns. So if you could be praying for him and for Donna, that would be great. Let's pray together. Dear God, we thank you for another day, for another week. We thank you for the talks that Christopher gave this past week on encouragement. And I pray that many were encouraged by you and by others, and that we took some time to even encourage ourselves as we go through this difficult time with the pandemic. We thank you for the encouragement that a few of the restrictions are starting to be lifted. Just being able to get out and go for a little bit of a longer walk on a trail or a park has been really encouraging for many. And just pray that you continue to help us to be wise and to continue to follow the guidelines that have been set for us, that we would continue to be safe, and that you would continue to provide health for so many of us, Lord. And I just ask that you would be with Doug right now, that you would lift him up, that you would comfort him, that you would encourage him and encourage Donna, that you would heal his body and what's happening. I pray that you'd be with the doctors and the nurses who are with him, that you would guide them, Lord, and they'd know the best way to take care of him. And we also continue to pray for Barbara Fanning and for Edith Bailey. May you be with each of them. May you continue to bring healing to them both and be with their families, as it's a very difficult time right now to have family members in hospital or home sick, as it's just hard, as most are not able to visit, or all of the family can't go in, just one member. And so I just pray that you would lift up the families of Doug and Barbara and Edith, and just comfort them during this time, Lord. We continue to pray for the families of the Canadian Armed Forces who lost a loved one in the helicopter accident. Just ask that you would just bring comfort and peace to their hearts, Lord, and for all those who were affected by that. We just continue to ask that you would heal our hearts. There's been so much grief in so many different areas of life, from death and grief of loss of activity and events and gathering together. And I just ask that you would continue to be with each one of us. And for those who are just struggling a bit more than others, may we be able to reach out in some way to encourage and to support those around us and those in our community, Lord. God, I ask that you would be with us now as we focus in on your word. And I pray that you'd be with Christopher, that he would just bring a message from you that will fill our hearts and that will help us to draw closer to you, to understand you a bit more, and that will transform us, Lord. We thank you for your love, that you do give comfort in times of struggle. In your name we pray. Amen.
All right. Well, happy Sunday. It's good to be with you. Let me start with first things first. Let's Change Your Life is the name of our sermon series. The subtitle for this, or the title for today's talk, is Listen to Your Mumsy. That is a reference to a Disney song. If you know what it is, by all means, throw it in the comments. This one is probably easier than the first one, but harder than last week. So I'll just be curious if you know it. Oh, and second, did you notice the picture that we started with? You probably counted flowers. There were 13, but that's actually not what I needed you to count. I was wondering if you would count the leaves on the flowers. I'm not going to tell you the right answer. You can take your guess if you want, and again, we'll toss that into the comments near the end of the service to see if anyone got it. So it's Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to everyone to whom that applies. Mother's Day, Pastor Erin, it started with this, but I want to echo it as well. Mother's Day is tricky at the best of times. I mean, all human relationships are. But if you are celebrating Mother's Day today, and if you are able to spend time with your mother or children, well, we just want to celebrate with you. We want to highlight this day, especially if you are celebrating this day for the first time as a new mother, as a new stepmother. Again, we just want to celebrate that with you. If you can't be with your mother because of COVID, if you can't be with your mother just because of distance, you're far apart. If you can't be with your mother because of loss, if you can't be with your mother because of family conflict, if you wished to be a mother but couldn't be, if you're grieving the loss of a child, if you're dealing with the separation of a child because of family conflict, if you're dealing with being away from your child because of distance or because of COVID, know that we're praying for you and that we mourn for you. No human parent, no matter how good or how well-intentioned, is perfect. And to parents, that is meant to be both a relief from the pressure to be perfect, and a correction for the feeling that you have it all figured out. For children, this is meant to bring solace, no matter their age, that you are not alone in the complicated feelings that you may have toward your parents. That said, what we're looking at today it's just one of those stories that does come out on Mother's Day a lot. It's the story of Ruth and Naomi and ultimately Boaz. We're going to look at the story in its entirety, kind of all in one go, but we're not going to read it all 4 chapters, though I would encourage you to do that at some point today if you have the opportunity, or if not today, this week. But I want to read just the first 10 chapters of the first verse, or I guess verses 8 to 18 of the first chapter. Let me read it now. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you and to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come home with me? Am I going to have any more sons who will become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and gave birth to sons, will you wait for them to grow up? Will you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this, they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and to her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So Naomi and her family end up moving to Moab. They are from they're from the Bethlehem area, or at least some of the farming communities surrounding Bethlehem, and they moved to Moab 10 years or so earlier than when we picked up this story, and they moved because of famine. That Israel, that the kingdom of Israel, or it's not a kingdom yet, but the community surrounding Israel was experiencing famine, but the neighboring kingdom of Moab was not. So they did what you would do in that circumstance. Naomi and family, her husband and 2 sons, they pick up and they move to Moab. And they probably assumed it was for a short time, but then, life happened. They settled. They found a home. They found work. Naomi's sons got married, and they settled. But then Naomi's husband died, and they mourned. But they stayed. Both her sons found wives in the community. Her sons weren't going to move, so they stayed as a family. And then tragedy struck again. And then it struck again. And then all 3 men of the house had perished. And there these 3 women were left, wondering what to do. 3 mourning widows, wondering what to do. 1 grieving mother. 2 women grieving of the family they thought that they were going to have, but now were not. And there these 3 women were, wondering what to do next. Naomi evidently is the first person to make the decision. She decides she's going to go back home. Because why wouldn't she? Her husband is gone. Her boys are gone. Now she's just a foreigner living in Moab with no hope or no help. No husband, no sons to provide for her. She risks being destitute. At home, she at least has some family she can probably lean on. Historic claims to land. She can access that ancient Hebrew social security system, the safety net for widows that may not be afforded to her in Moab. So she makes the decision to head back. And Orpah and Ruth decide to go with her. And that in itself is extraordinary. Because they could have gone home. They were released. There was nothing tying them to their mother-in-law anymore. They are evidently fairly young widows who they passed away before they had a chance to have children and establish their own families. They could go back to their family of origin and, after a period of mourning, begin anew. Find new husbands, start new lives. In fact, that's exactly what Naomi says that they should do. Go back with your family of origin. Go back to your mother and your father. Thank you for the kindness. Thank you for the tenderness. Thank you for sticking with me this far. This is hard on all of us, but you are young women whose lives are in front of them. I'm an older woman. My life is mostly behind me. I just want to go back home with my people and kind of die alone. And Orpah and Ruth both initially protest. Neither of them will have any of it. Naomi insists, and Orpah agrees. She goes back home, and that's not an indictment. It actually makes sense that she does that. That's the understanding thing to do. She wept, she wailed, she wished her mother-in-law Godspeed, and then she went to continue her life. Most of us would do the same. Ruth took the extraordinary step of rejecting that. She made a vow before God to her mother-in-law that she was going to be with her to the bitter end. That no matter where life took them, no matter what ups and downs that they were going to face, that they were going to face it together. And that is an incredible level of devotion. Because Naomi was going back home to be back with her people, to access the safety net that widows and the poor would have. But Ruth, well, she was going to be a foreigner in a foreign land. I mean, that's why Naomi was leaving, so she wouldn't be a foreigner in a foreign land in need. And Ruth was taking on that exact fear that Naomi was trying to avoid. So they traveled together. They went to Bethlehem. It caused a stir. The people saw Naomi returned. She explained the story and then let her know, or let it be known, that she no longer wished to be called Naomi, that instead she wished to be called Mara, meaning bitter. Because from her perspective, the Lord had been bitter to her. And who can blame her? Her husband is gone. Her sons are gone. The grandchildren she thought she was going to see was gone. The support system she thought she had was gone. Who can blame her? Mara. My life is bitter. Some amount of time passes. I don't know, days, weeks. They're settled in somewhere. Probably some home that belonged to Naomi. Family, Mara's family. And Ruth decides, well, they're going to need food. So she does the only thing that she can. She goes to some of these neighboring fields and begins to pick grain. See, in ancient Hebrew culture, in ancient Israel culture, the social safety net that existed was that farmers weren't allowed to till or weren't allowed to harvest to the very edge of their fields. That the grain that was on the periphery, well, that was for the poor to come and pick by hand, not to damage the stalk, just to pick the heads of grain. And as those who were harvesting would move through the fields, that anything they dropped, that was for the poor. That was for the people who would come behind them, the women, the orphans, the widows, those who had nothing else. The food that dropped into the hands of the harvesters was not to be picked up by the harvesters. It was for the poor. Now, obviously, harvesters try not to drop a lot, because the more you drop, the less your land brings in, the less your master has, or you have if it's your own farm. But, if you ever picked apples or picked strawberries or picked anything, I mean, you're bound to knock some stuff off as you're picking other things up. So things fall. So Ruth finds a field. She finds a number of women in it. She has, for whatever reason, a sense of safety, that this is an okay place to be, and she begins to gather grains. This field is owned by a man named Boaz, who we are eventually explained is a relative of Naomi's, a distant relative, a cousin probably. And he inquires about this foreigner who's working in the field. He wonders who she is. People don't travel internationally. People don't go from community to community. So he probably has a pretty good idea who she is, but here's this person he's never seen before, and he's told about her. Now he's heard stories of Ruth. I mean, Ruth heard stories of Ruth. Ruth and Naomi arriving back in Bethlehem caused a stir, and he is impressed, intrigued. He values the kindness that Ruth is showing to Naomi. He calls her over. They share a meal of bread and vinegar and a roasted grain. He says, "Stay in my fields. I have talked to my men. You are safe here. Stay with the women." He even then instructs his harvesters to deliberately be more clumsy. Drop more grain, drop more food, put more barley on the ground. So Ruth stays there from sun up to sundown. She goes and mills the barley, and she walks away with 30 pounds of barley flour, which is extraordinary, far more than she ever should have been able to glean, if not for Boaz's kindness. She comes home. Naomi is flabbergasted that she was able to get this much food and asks, where does it come from? Ruth explained, and she said, okay, we have some family members who are still caring for us, who are still looking for us. Stay in his fields. He is right. Some of these other places you may be harmed or mistreated. Stay there. And then we get this little note that says Ruth continues to glean in Boaz's fields for the barley and wheat harvest. And not being an ancient barley and wheat harvester myself, I had to look that up. That's about a 2 to 4 month window of season. So this story is not, one day, the next day, the next day. This is playing out over the span of months. So as the season progresses, as barley is harvested, as wheat is harvested, Naomi then decides, well, I'll give it to you in her own words. My daughter, I must find a home for you, where you will be well provided for. Now, Boaz, with whom the women you have worked, he is a relative of ours. Tonight, he will be widowing the barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, get dressed in your best clothes, then go down to the threshing floor. But don't let him know that you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. See, Naomi decides that Ruth has been so kind to her, so good to her, that the two of them in a man's world and a dog-eat-dog world, the two of them have been together, and Ruth has been doing the best she can to provide for her and her mother-in-law. And now, as time has passed, Naomi, her mother-in-law, says, this can't go on forever. I appreciate what you're doing for me. I love what you're doing for me, but it is time for this situation to improve for you. We need to approach Boaz and see if we can't get you married. He is a kinsman redeemer. He's a close relative. He could fill in for your lost husband. And that sounds weird in our modern context, but it's actually really common in cultures all around the world. The goal is to make sure that a family's name, that the name of a clan is not lost forever. So if all male relatives die, that's considered an incredible tragedy. So it is the responsibility of the next closest male relative to marry the widow, so that the first child they have, the first male child they have, will carry on the family legacy and the family lineage of the person who passed away. What's incredible is that this shouldn't actually be an option for Ruth, because Ruth is not part of this Hebrew tribe. She's not a Benjamite. She's not from Judah. Naomi for sure, but Naomi, she's too old to bear children, in her own words anyway. Ruth is a foreigner. Naomi is saying that she should be afforded not just the same rights, not the rights of a foreigner in Judah, but the rights of a citizen, the rights of a true daughter of Israel. And Ruth does what Naomi suggests. Now, I'm going to admit right now that this part of the story is odd, and I don't totally know what's going on here. I don't know what this encounter is supposed to be like between Ruth and Boaz. I do know, if you read any of the ancient kind of rabbi commentary, they are very, very, very quick to say that everything about this encounter is incredibly innocent. Very innocent. Impeccably innocent. In fact, they hang on a whole slew of words that she didn't just put on her best clothes, she put on her best Sabbath clothes, because Sabbath. And she didn't just, it wasn't just oil to wash her face, but it was in fact like a holy cleansing oil, and on and on and on they go. They go out of their way to make sure that this looks incredibly innocent. A lot of Christian commentaries do the same. The story is more tongue-in-cheek than that. It may be an incredibly innocent encounter. It may be a more intimate encounter. But no matter what it is an incredibly bold encounter from Ruth. She is taking some amount of risk on. She is approaching Boaz and incredibly boldly and declaring what her intentions are, what Naomi's intentions are. Their intention is that he should marry her, bring them into his family, and offer an heir to the lost men in their lives. And the conversation that Ruth and Boaz has, he agrees. He sets that he'll do it the next day. He commends her for her upstanding character. And then they do. The next day, Boaz meets with the town council, the wise men of the land of the town. There is a unnamed relative who actually is a closer relative, and if anybody is going to do what Ruth and Naomi are asking, it actually should be him first. He's the first person who this responsibility should fall. Boaz brings it up to say that there's this parcel of land that has come up available for our family. Do you want to redeem it? He initially says yes, and then he says in front of these witnesses, wonderful, if you want it, I won't stop you, I'll give it to you, but you should know that by taking this land, you also need to take Ruth on as a wife. This other unnamed relative kind of stops for a second, and he says, no, I can't do that. If I do that, then my own property, the inheritance process may get messy. I better not do that. If you want it, it's all yours, Boaz. Boaz goes, well, if you insist, I guess I'll do my duty. And he does. He gets married to Ruth. They have a child, a son. Naomi, the grandmother now, is so ecstatic. She holds the boy Obed. The women in the town declare that she's like a mother again. And then she says that the Lord is now with her, no longer against her. And of course, from our perspective, we can see that the Lord has, in fact, not really been against her. Actually, this is the passage from Ruth. It's pretty beautiful. Let me read it. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive and gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, praise to the Lord, who this day has left you not without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and she cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. What do we do with this narrative? It's interesting. It's beautiful in parts. It's a little scandalous in parts. It's intriguing. The book of Ruth kind of tells us something that happened, but not necessarily something that should happen. And that's actually true with a lot of narratives in the Bible. They tell us things that happened, but not necessarily things that we should emulate. For example, I generally would not suggest that it is a wise course of action to get dressed up all kind of fancy, sneak in to a place where men have been drinking quite heavily, and then falling asleep in kind of hay piles, and then scooting up to the guy you like the most to see what happens as the night goes on. Like, generally speaking, this may not work out well if that's the method you have for asking for a favor. It worked out fine for Ruth, but again, not a broadly applicable plan. But I would say the story does, in broad strokes, remind us not to abandon those who are in need, even when it makes life a little more difficult for us, even when it makes life a little more challenging. Ruth probably would have had an easier go at life if she just went home to her parents and got remarried. I mean, it's a testament to the kind of relationship that Naomi must have built with her daughter-in-law, that she must have had with her sons, that she must have had with her husband. What household, or what kind of love-filled household must have that been for Ruth to decide her best course of action was to go to Bethlehem with Naomi instead of staying with her own people? There are two other general points that I'd like us to think about. If there's anything this narrative can tell us, I think it is that we should be aware of the company that we're keeping. Because Ruth and Naomi and ultimately Boaz became good company for each other. They impacted their lives on each other in incredibly positive ways. Naomi was in a dark spot. Ruth was in a difficult spot, but they banded together and cared for one another. Boaz, so impressed with how those two widows, mother and daughter-in-law, cared for one another, decided that he would step up in a way that he was not required to support them. So keep good company. Maybe you've actually heard this expression, show me your friends and I will show you your future. Or maybe you've heard of the idea that we tend to average out, that if you think of the 5 people who are most close to you, that you'll be kind of an average of them. That the direction of their lives will deeply impact the direction of your life. That's true. It's very true. Paul tells us in 2 letters to his his friends in Corinth, the Corinthian church. He writes 2 letters, and in both letters he has a little bit of advice about how believers and non-believers should relate. And I'm going to say on the top, it sounds pretty harsh at first, but he says this: do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? What harmony is there between Christ and Belial? Or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? He says in his other letter to the Corinthians, quoting the Greek poet Meander, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Again, these sound pretty harsh. They sound pretty hard. I mean, Paul, what are you saying? I have friends in the community. Paul is just trying to communicate a truth that the people who we relate to change who we are, and we help change who they are. And Paul issues a stark warning. You need to choose your company carefully. Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, they chose wisely. And it grew. And it came to their benefit. But this isn't just a faith thing. Like, this isn't just a Christian thing. This just is kind of how human relationships work. For example, if you were to be in a friend group, if you had a friend who was obese, you have a 46% chance, 46% higher chance of becoming obese yourself in the next 2 years. But it's more than just that. If you're friends with a person who has a friend who's obese, in the next 2 years, you have a 20% higher than normal chance of becoming obese. Or if you're friends with a person who has a friend that's obese, so kind of 3 levels of friendship away, you have a 10% chance, higher than normal chance of being obese in the next 2 years. But it doesn't just work for, perceived negatives. If you are friends with a person who has a friend who has a friend who is an incredibly happy person, On average, you are 6% happier. And I know 6% sounds like such a silly number. Why would we bother talking about it? But if you were to get a $10,000 a year salary increase, on average, that will make you 2% happier for the year. The people that we surround ourselves with really dictate how our lives go. They really shape us and mold us and move us. So we have to choose wisely the people that we connect with. Ruth and Naomi and Boaz chose well. The company you keep will determine your life, for better or worse. This last point is brief. But once you get the people in your life, the good company that you want to keep, there's going to come points in your life where they're going to give you advice about the next thing that you should do in your life. They're going to see something that's happening in your life. They're going to see some event that's going on around, and they're going to tell you how to deal with it. What course of action you should do. What decision you should make. Maybe you asked. Maybe they volunteered the information because you are so close after all. You should listen to it. You should listen to the good advice of the good people that you have surrounded yourselves with. That's what happened for Ruth. Again, Naomi's advice seems incredibly specific for that incredibly specific moment in time, but she obviously knew the culture. She knew the land. She knew the people in the area. She knew the character of Boaz. She knew that if this course of action, or was at least reasonably assured that this course of action, this advice that she was giving to Ruth was going to produce the improvement in Ruth's life that they both wanted. And Ruth did it. She listened to her mother-in-law. Even though I am sure the advice sounded strange. But she did it. And it worked out. If we want a proverb to hang it on, the proverb is, the way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Meaning it's easy enough for you to convince yourself what a good idea is, but you may prove to be wrong. But you have wise people around you. Listen to them. And if you're not sure who the wise people are around you, James gives you some pretty good advice. James says this: who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by the deeds done in humility. That comes from wisdom. Meaning, you're not sure who you should listen to, what advice you should take? Look at the people you admire. Look at the people who are living a kind of life that you wish to be living. Look at the people who have made decisions early in their life and have ended up in a position that you want to be in. Ask. How did they get there? What choices did they make? What would they do in the situation that you're in? And then listen. It can be so difficult, especially if we are in the middle of an emotive moment, there are so few big choices in life that we have to make that aren't emotionally charged, that don't have some possibility of having blinders on us, that in some sense our own judgment is a little bit impaired. That's why you want good counsel. That's why you want good advice around you. Naomi and Ruth became incredible partners in their kind of journey through life. Ruth was taking care of Naomi, and now it was Naomi's turn to take care of Ruth. Ruth did so with labor and kindness and gathering materials, and Ruth and Naomi offered wisdom and counsel. Ruth cut them through the day. Naomi set them up to be ready for the rest of their lives. So let me wrap up with this thought. The story of Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, is a lovely story of people caring for each other in a pretty dark time. It's a pretty dark time in the season of Israel. It's in the period of Judges, where there is just death and destruction, famine and plague. It's a chaotic time. But it's also a pretty dark time for Naomi and for Ruth. It's a difficult time. And in these difficult times, these nationally difficult times, and these personally difficult times, if nothing else that we can glean from the story is find a person that you can be close to, that you can show kindness to, that they can show kindness to you in return. Find the people that you can stick with and care for them. Because there are people right now in your circle who probably need a little bit of caring, who need a little bit of encouragement, who need a little bit of help. In the darkest of times, be kind. Because that kindness may change your life forever. Will almost certainly change your life for the better. Let me offer a prayer. Gracious God, we just celebrate and thank you for today. Thank you for the day you've given. We know that the Mother's Day this year is pretty radically different for most of us. Where there are opportunities for us to engage in this day joyfully, may we do so. If there are moments when we must engage with this day with sorrow or with mourning, we trust that you will meet us there. And we just pray this in Christ's name. Amen. So thank you for connecting with us today. Look forward to connecting you throughout the week on online and social media. I'm going to offer you a benediction and send you out. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. We'll see you next week. Same Baptist time, same Baptist channel.